It seemed at the time impossible.
Has the most famous ship in the history of the world been discovered at last?
The Gilgamesh epic paralleled exactly the story of Noah in the Bible.
There is plenty of ancient historical evidence spanning nearly 2,000 years that the Ark is on Mount Ararat.
The location of the mystical Mount Sinai itself is the subject of relentless argument.
The biblical story of the burning bush is completely true and totally provable.
It must have seemed to Moses that God was asking him to do the impossible.
In the book of Matthew, we're told that the graves were opened and the bodies of many dead saints were raised to life.
During the night, all of Sennacherib's army had been struck down by some kind of plague.
Mary Magdalene was a woman of independent means and spirit.
For nearly 2,000 years, she's inspired millions of people, especially women.
The Grail is believed by many to be the cup containing the wine that Christ associated with his blood at the Last Supper. According to the legend, only Sir Galahad was able to reach it, dying in a moment of transcendental glory. The sound of pottery shattering caught his attention. The curiosity of the world was ignited.
The Dead Sea Scrolls date back almost 2,000 years.
Along with the many papyrus and leather scrolls was a scroll made of copper. As Herod's men attempted to open the tomb, a blast of flame filled the chamber and drove them back.
God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place.
And the stars of heaven fell unto earth.
Fires are burning all over the city. Several plane crashes with countless calls keep coming in. Complete chaos is the only way I can describe the situation.
For the great day of his wrath is come.
It turns out that Bible prophecy has an unparalleled record of accuracy.
The focus of the conflict lies in the destiny of Jerusalem.
This will be the last great battle, and one in which God himself will eventually take part. You'll be amazed at what has been discovered. The Bible is the oldest continuous history of any people on earth today. But is it truly history? Can we say with any degree of certainty, for example, that the miraculous stories attributed to Moses are factual? Let's see what we can learn from those who seek answers in the depths of uncharted waters. Answers that have been waiting to be discovered since Moses crossed the Red Sea. There's an old saying among the Jews that goes, "From Moses to Moses, there is no one like Moses." The reference bridges a gap of nearly 4,000 years from the Moses of the Old Testament to the great 12th century rabbi Moses Maimonides. It is intended as an expression of the great honor and respect the Jewish people still hold for the prophet and leader who they believe brought their ancestors out of slavery in Egypt. Through Moses, they escaped the vengeance of the Pharaoh when God opened a passageway through the Red Sea. But what do we know of this man, Moses? And how did he get to such an exalted position? The Bible gives a remarkable account about the history of the man known as Moses. According to the story in the book of Exodus, the Israelites were a people that had been enslaved by Egypt and were growing in number, much to the concern of their Egyptian slave masters. Because of this, the Pharaoh ordered all male infants of the Hebrews to be slain. A young mother, one of the enslaved Israelites, could no longer protect her infant son. She put him in a basket and set him afloat on the Nile River near the palace of the Pharaoh. Pharaoh's daughter, the princess of Egypt, found the basket and took the infant to raise as her own. She called the child Moses because she said she drew him from the water. Raised in royal surroundings, it was not until Moses reached manhood that he first discovered he was an Israelite. It was then that he began to identify with his true heritage. Actually, the truth of the story of the Exodus depends on the answer to three questions. Did the 10 plagues summoned by Moses against Egypt actually occur? Was there really an enslaved people called the Israelites who made a great exodus out of Egypt, led by a man who received his instructions from a burning bush? And is it possible that the Red Sea really parted, as stated in the Bible? The answers to these questions will determine whether we're dealing with a miracle or a mirage. And today, there is little agreement among the experts.
Two of the world's great religions base many of their beliefs, even their geopolitical systems, on events and declarations from Mount Sinai. The historic record dates back thousands of years. Why is it then that nobody seems to know exactly where Mount Sinai is? Were the tablets of the Ten Commandments literally carved by the finger of God into stone from this mountain?
The sons of Isaac and the sons of Ishmael have been at war for over 4,000 years, and today's headlines demonstrate that, if anything, the situation is getting worse. Could it be that the ancient mountain of Moses will once again be crucial to the very survival of Israel? Astonishing mysteries are beginning to be solved, and a new picture is coming to light. Will these discoveries necessitate a rewriting of human history?
The idea that hundreds of thousands of Israelites passed through the Red Sea is crazy. The Bible says that there were 603,000 males, which means over 2 million people who passed through those waters. It most likely would have taken several weeks for all those people just to cross. The whole idea is crazy.
The biblical story of the Exodus is an eyewitness account written by a layman to his contemporaries. Although the writer was not a scholarly historian, there are enough historical kernels indicating that the account is factual from both an archaeological and Egyptian anthropological perspective.
On the face of it, a story about a burning bush is pure fiction, or at least mythology. It smacks of pious enthusiasm. The idea that a bush can be burned and still not be consumed is just not within the realm of possibility.
The biblical story of the burning bush is completely true and totally provable.
Archaeology provides background information for unlocking narratives and events such as the Exodus account. In this case, the account contains sufficient place names cross-referenced in non-biblical Sumerian and Assyrian cuneiform tablets to confirm the accuracy of the Exodus account, and to assure scholars that it was not an account invented for later consumption.
From the burning bush to the parting of the Red Sea, the story of the Israelites' exodus out of Egypt has been a constant source of disagreement among the experts.
Faster, you lazy dogs! Ha! Why do you rest, dog? Get to work!
Moses began to take a deeper, more sympathetic interest in his own people. When he began to witness their ill treatment, his anger and resentment began to grow toward the Egyptians.
Stay your hand, pitmaster! Why do you lash this man? Man? These are not men, my lord, but lazy dogs, and the scourge is the only language they understand. Now get to it! Stay!
I meant not to kill him.
Moses tried to secretly bury the Egyptian in the sand, but was found out and had to flee to the wilderness of Midian to escape the Pharaoh's death sentence. He was befriended by Jethro, a Midianite priest, and married his daughter. For 40 years, Moses lived the simple life of a shepherd. Then, in a matter of minutes, he came to know his destiny.
I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have seen the misery of my people who are enslaved in Egypt. You, Moses, are going to go to Pharaoh and lead my people out of their bondage in Egypt.
Who am I to lead the Israelites out of Egypt? Why should Pharaoh listen to me?
Do not fear, for I shall be with you.
Moses' encounter with the burning bush is one of the most memorable stories in the Bible, and certainly one of the most controversial. We are told that not only did the bush burst into flame, but it was not consumed by the fire. The story has long been questioned by Bible critics, so we went to Israel to question the experts there on the subject.
At the foot of Mount Sinai, one finds the monastery of St. Catherine. The local story of the shepherds, the nomadic people, the Bedouins, do hold that the actual bush that is found inside the monastery is still the same bush.
I can't confirm or reject that the bush growing at the monastery was the actual burning bush, but it is a specific desert plant that fits the biblical description. It's the Fraxinella, or gas plant, Dictamnus albus, a sturdy perennial bush with white or purple flowers common in the Middle East. The bush produces an oil so volatile that it can be ignited by the sun. The oil quickly burns up, but the bush itself is not damaged.
If there is scientific evidence to support this odd biblical account, does it lend credibility to the rest of the Moses account? It must have seemed to Moses that God was asking him to do the impossible and at great personal risk. But Moses and his brother Aaron, nevertheless, went to Pharaoh, plead for the release of his people. Each of their meetings brought about a judgment on the people of Egypt, and after each plague, Moses went to Pharaoh and asked him to let his people go. But each time, Pharaoh refused. According to the Bible, each plague was more intense than the last, and for years, scholars have searched for some hint in the Egyptian writings that would point to such horrific events actually happening.
The main purpose of the Exodus story is not to describe history. The main purpose of the Exodus story, as it was created by the pre-scribes who lived in Jerusalem, was to glorify their God and to make their God look greater than any other God. And what they used was a series of old legends and distorted memories which they put together to create this story which has no relationship to history.
But the Bible remained the only source of information about these devastating plagues until recently.
And there's an ancient Egyptian papyrus document called the Ipuwer Papyrus, and it recounts in eyewitness fashion the plague of blood, the plague of cattle disease, the plague of strange fire phenomena, the plague on the firstborn, the strange darkness, all the events that we previously thought we only knew about from the Bible. We can read about it in Egyptian records.
Little by little, science and archaeology seem to be catching up with the biblical account. But what of the most fantastic episode of all, the parting of the Red Sea? Could it have happened? You'll be amazed at what has been discovered. The miracles of Moses are almost too many to count, and some scholars insist they're too fantastic to be believed. But many of them are not only still believed by the Jewish people, they honor them with centuries-old traditions. The Bible describes the arrival of the last plague with great drama. God instructed every Israelite to stay indoors and prepare a meal of lamb or goat. They were to take the blood of these animals and use it to place a mark over the door of their houses. On that night the Lord descended on the land of Egypt, and the firstborn of every Egyptian family was struck down in death. But the Jewish families who had marked their doorways were spared. That great miracle is still celebrated by Jewish families as the Feast of the Passover. For the Egyptians, this final plague was the most terrible. Even Pharaoh lost his beloved son. Finally, his resistance was broken, and he ordered the Israelites to be set free. But they must leave the land of the Nile completely. The Bible tells us the Lord provided a cloud cover by day and a column of fire by night to guide the Israelites through the desert. But the big question is, where did they go? According to the Bible, their destination was to be the land of Canaan. The most direct route, called the Way of the Land of the Philistines, would have taken them to the north, was much shorter than the southern route, and would have most likely put them on a path toward the Sea of Reeds, a shallow, marshy area at the north end of the Gulf of Suez. It is this area that many scholars have accepted as the point of crossing. But is it?
There are some major difficulties with the Sea of Reeds site as the point of crossing.
First of all, if this is the point at which the Israelites entered the Red Sea, well, they're still in Egypt. However, Exodus 14:11 clearly states that they were out of Egypt. Now, in this verse, the panicking Israelites understood that they were no longer in Egypt because they asked, "What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt?"
Were there no graves in Egypt, Moses, that you led us out here into the wilderness to die?
Did we not speak to you in Egypt of this? Did we not tell you to let us be?
Also, the crossing place is not a shallow sea of reeds or inland lake, as some have affirmed. That conclusion, I believe, is pure conjecture and cannot be supported by the biblical record. The names from the Exodus account were probably inserted on maps by guesswork and cannot be located with certainty today. A more careful reading of the scriptures revealed some very interesting facts. First of all, the waters they crossed were deep, really deep. Isaiah, for example, talks about a path through the mighty waters and acknowledges that it was God who dried the sea, the waters of the great deep, Isaiah 51:10. Well, that hardly sounds like 2.5 million people sloshing through a shallow swamp somewhere. The route specified in Exodus 13:18 would seem to require a crossing site somewhere along the southern shore of the Gulf of Aqaba, with a beach large enough to accommodate the entire nation of Israel, along with their immense herds and flocks. When the Israelites reached the Red Sea, they were instructed by God in Exodus 14:2 to turn back and camp by a place called Pi-hahiroth, which is between Migdol and the Red Sea. It appears that God was laying a trap for Pharaoh. Not only was Moses told to take the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea, but they were also supernaturally guided there by a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Now they're told to turn back and await the deliverance of the Lord.
It's easy to see how Pharaoh could have considered them trapped. Perhaps the Pharaoh was convinced the Hebrews were in a situation where he couldn't possibly lose, which gave him the courage to tempt God's anger one more time. Perhaps Moses even wondered himself how God would save his people this time, but his faith was unshakable.
The spies have returned from Ramses. Pharaoh resents our release now and sends his army to destroy us.
We must put the sea between them and the people.
Have your scouts been able to find any place that we might possibly cross?
There is nothing to the north or to the south. In a week, we might be able to reach the road at Horus in the north. But that would be far too late.
And worse, then we should become a great temptation for the Philistines to come down on us from the north.
Can you place your men-at-arms between Pharaoh and the people?
There is not enough time. Except for the inner guard, my soldiers are dispersed amongst the tribes, trying to make warriors out of brickmakers and farmers. If I could gather them all, we would not be able to stop Pharaoh's archers and chariots.
What else do I see in your face, Joshua?
There are troublemakers about, stirring up the tribes. There is danger within, as well as from the outside.
According to the verses of Exodus 14, the people quickly learned of the Pharaoh's change of heart.
The Egyptians were working us to death slowly. But now Moses has found a quicker way to kill us.
Do all of us despise so much eating from Egyptian flesh pot that we now must fill our stomachs with sand?
Listen to me. If we surrender peacefully, if we go back now, yes, we will be punished, but we will still be alive afterwards.
Which do you prefer? A few lashes or an Egyptian spear in your chest?
Does Moses think he can humble the mighty Pharaoh and still live? Let us tell Moses now. Behold what you have done to us, O mighty Lord Moses.
Do you not see the dust clouds of doom? Do you not hear the earth thundering with the sound of Pharaoh's chariots?
I see, and I hear. What would you have me do?
Make me your emissary. I will go back to the Egyptians, reason with them, beg to return and be forgiven.
Emissary? I will cleave you in two, you traitorous turnip.
Let us hear it all.
Were there no graves in Egypt, Moses, that you led us out here into the wilderness to die?
Did we not speak to you in Egypt of this? Did we not tell you to let us be?
All of us, we told you that it was better to live under the heavy hand of the Egyptians than to die like diseased animals in the desert. But you wouldn't listen. Not the mighty Lord Moses.
Do we want to die out here? No! Or would we be alive in Egypt?
Yes! Peace! Peace! Still your tongues!
Where is your faith? Do you think the Lord brought you out of bondage in Egypt to die on the shores of this sea? Fear not the Egyptians and their chariots. You need do nothing but be still and turn your fears into faith. Then you will see God's power.
The Bible tells us that at God's command, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and God sent a strong east wind that drove back the waters, creating a path through the midst of the sea. With the pursuing Egyptian army behind them, the Israelites were able to cross the wide opening in the sea in a matter of hours. Pharaoh's army, with hundreds of chariots and thousands of soldiers, followed the Israelites into the sea.
God, thy will be done.
Some critics express doubts that Moses and the Israelites crossed the Red Sea at all. Others do not believe any part of the Exodus, but recently there has been a discovery of some remarkable evidence.
There are certain hallmark pieces of pottery that we look for in attempting to trace the Exodus event and the migration of the Israelites into the land of Canaan. One of these pieces is this very nice pilgrim flask that's very nicely painted, and the shape itself apparently indicated the product that was shipped in it. It comes from Cyprus, but it's important for dating the other material that we find in connection with the Israelites. Another piece that we have is the Philistine beer jug. The Philistines were very fond of drinking beer. It was fermented right in the jug, and you can see it was sieved as it was poured out into the drinking vessel itself. The Israelites copied the Philistine ware, which was very highly painted, and came out with a very poor reproduction. So we can always tell when we come into a site that the Israelites themselves have now moved on to this site. Daily, there are more and more pieces of evidence that are being excavated that are helping to demonstrate the fact that the Israelites came in the Exodus and settled in the land of Canaan.
One of the interesting questions that Emmanuel Anati has answered in his research, and he's one of the top Sinai archaeologists, is the question, what were the Israelites doing during the 40 years that they were wandering in the desert? Well, Dr. Anati has discovered something like 30,000 rock inscriptions which he dates to the time period of the Exodus, and which he believes the Israelites carved on those hot weathered rocks.
New findings are being unearthed at several archaeological sites, such as the unusual pottery items and rock drawings, which give hard evidence that the Exodus really did happen. But even as the validity of the Exodus is being scientifically proven, the controversy over the parting of the Red Sea is heating up. Recent discoveries by some researchers seem to point to a crossing site near the mouth of the Gulf of Aqaba, where the Red Sea is only about 5 miles wide.
At this site in 1799, Napoleon's engineers discovered an underwater ridge some 600 feet wide that extended from shore to shore. His engineers calculated the right time for crossing this 5.2-mile strip when the east wind would blow sufficiently to clear the seabed of water. Napoleon, however, barely escaped with his life when a sudden change in the wind's direction brought an onrush of water covering this strip within just a matter of minutes.
Professor Doran Knopf of Florida State University also found this an intriguing site.
We were intrigued by the possibility that perhaps there is some explanation for a similar process. So what we did, we developed what we call in physical oceanography a mathematical model of the part of the Red Sea where many people believe that crossing could have been. Okay, what we have here now is a physical model of the Red Sea. The deep part supposed to represent the main body of the Red Sea, which is about 2,000 or 3,000 feet deep, and the shallow part, with the one with the sloping bottom, supposed to represent the Gulf, which is much shallower. As we said before, it's about 100 feet deep. In addition to this, we introduced here an artificial ridge, which you see right here, and the depth of the water above that artificial ridge is only about 10 feet high. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the wind blow from here, and you will see how the water recedes and, in fact, exposes the ridge to the air. Okay, so what you can see now is that most of the water, in fact, to the left of the ridge is blown away. There is still some water there, and you see that there is an exposed area right there. All right? So the idea is that the Israelis crossed on this part of the ridge which was exposed, and they saw water on the two sides, right? They saw the water on the left side of the ridge and the water on the right side. And I'm going to cut the wind off now, and I'm going to do that abruptly, and you will see how it comes back. So let's do that. And of course, what happens after that is that when the wind relaxes, the water wants to come back to the position that it had before, and it does that via a gravity wave, which moves at the speed we calculated to be like 15 feet per second or so, which is of course a speed that one cannot escape.
Does this prove once and for all the validity of the biblical account of the Exodus and the parting of the Red Sea? Certainly not all critics would agree, but persistent scientific and archaeological research seems to be bringing us closer to an explanation and a verifiable site. Perhaps it will be a whole new generation of brilliant young researchers, theologians, and scientists that will finally solve this mystery. Two of the world's great religions, Christianity and Judaism, base many of their beliefs, even their geopolitical systems, on events and declarations from Mount Sinai. But nobody seems to know exactly where Mount Sinai is. Is there a real mountain that holds the secrets of God's interaction with man? Were the tablets of the Ten Commandments literally carved by the finger of God into stone from this mountain? New information seems to indicate that the real Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. And interestingly enough, the Saudi Arabian government has erected a chain-link fence and closed down all geological and archaeological studies of this mountain in the ancient land of Midian. Why? The Sinai Desert. Moses has led his people out of bondage in Egypt. They are weary from their long trek to find the Promised Land. It has become clear to Moses that they need a set of laws to live by. According to the Bible, Moses leaves his people and ascends Mount Sinai to communicate with God. He has gone so long that the people become restless and, believing Moses is dead, build a gold idol to worship. Is this story true? Did God give Moses the Ten Commandments? Did the Exodus really occur, or is all this just a folktale? Can science shed any light on this controversial part of the Bible?
The story of Moses receiving the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai is full of inconsistencies. It is impossible to sort fact from fiction.
The Ten Commandments account by Moses is 100% factual, and there are no contradictions. It's a straightforward story, also confirmed in the Talmud and other ancient rabbinical commentaries. We can prove that the Ten Commandments were given to Moses on stone tablets, and we also know exactly where the stone tablets are today.
Since the 4th century A.D., a high mountain near the southern end of the Sinai Peninsula, officially labeled Jebel Musa, has been regarded by many faithful Christians as the Mount Sinai. But is it? St. Catherine's Monastery, located at the base of the mountain, was constructed by order of the Emperor Justinian between 527 and 565 AD. It is built around what is thought by those who inhabit the monastery and many in the surrounding area to be the bush that Moses saw burning but not consumed. By order of Queen Helena, mother of the Emperor Constantine, a chapel was built over this very bush centuries ago. This monastery is in fact a spectacular natural setting for the second largest collection of illustrated manuscripts in the world, a collection exceeded only by the Vatican's. But if so many generations of rulers, priests, and kings are satisfied with this Mount Sinai, what is it that makes today's scholars and investigators turn their attention to a mountain in Saudi Arabia called Jebel el-Lawz?
None of the suggested sites in the Sinai Peninsula fit the biblical requirements. The traditional site, called Jebel Musa and located near St. Catherine's Monastery, fails all of the historical, geographic, and archaeological tests.
Perhaps we should take a moment to discover exactly what these tests are and how they can be applied some 4,000 years after the fact. To summarize the story briefly, a young Moses, raised as an Egyptian prince, was forced to flee into the desert to escape the wrath of Pharaoh after he killed an Egyptian overseer who was beating a Hebrew slave. One day, while grazing his flock on the slopes of Mount Sinai, he encountered a marvelous sight. A bush suddenly burst into flame, but it was not consumed, and out of the burning bush, Moses heard the voice of God.
I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
The life of Moses would never be the same. The Lord told him to return to Egypt and bring the Hebrews out of bondage. This was to be the great exodus out of Egypt and into the Promised Land. Probably due to the many years in Egyptian bondage, the differences among the various tribal groups were much greater than their similarities. Strange Egyptian gods were still worshipped, and ancient pagan rituals still practiced. There was no common law to fit crimes and punishment, and violence began spreading like a plague. It soon became apparent to Moses that these differences would destroy the people if they could not be resolved.
Brothers, please!
The Bible says that God called upon Moses to climb the heights of Sinai and there to wait upon his appearance. Then, while Moses prepared his brother Aaron to sit in his place, the news spread quickly through the camp.
Joshua, here's where I shall leave you.
The priest scribes who wrote the 5 books of the Bible attributed to Moses could not even decide on whether the sacred mountain of Moses was named Sinai or Horeb. 37 times it's called Sinai, and 17 times it's called Horeb.
While the mountain on which Moses received the 10 Commandments is called alternately Sinai or Horeb in the Scriptures, there is little difficulty in explaining this apparent contradiction. During King David's reign, 2 versions of the same scripture were brought together in a manner that allowed both northern and southern Israelite tribes to keep their familiar identifiers for geographic places. Sinai and Horeb are the same mountain. Nothing in the Bible suggests that they are not.
Mount Sinai. Virtually every major event associated with the Exodus somehow involves this holy mountain. That being the case, certain identifying characteristics are required by the biblical account that can help us pinpoint the location of Mount Sinai. But what are they?
First, it had to be located in ancient Media, which is in present-day Saudi Arabia. Secondly, on the backside of the mountain there must be a vast desert, as you see here. Thirdly, it must be located completely outside of Egypt and its controlled territories, which would exclude the Sinai Peninsula. None of the other proposed mountain sites fits all these requirements except Jebel El Lawz.
But if that's true, how did Jebel Musa and the site of St. Catherine's Monastery get such a hold on the popular and scholarly imagination?
Unknown to most people, the Jebel Musa site was selected solely on the opinion of one man, or perhaps we should say one man's mother. The Roman Emperor Constantine the Great sent his mother Helena to the Middle East to discover spots he had seen in visions. Helena ordered a church built on the spot where 4th century Bedouins said they had found the burning bush. What we must understand is that Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula was selected without any scientific or archaeological evidence being considered.
There doesn't seem to be any firm Jewish tradition that supports Constantine's site either. In fact, the Jewish Encyclopedia states flatly that there is no Jewish tradition of the geographical location of Mount Sinai. But that also means there is no Jewish tradition that supports the site in Saudi Arabia. What is it that points scholars toward this site?
The earliest Jewish source, other than the Torah, that discusses the location of Mount Sinai is the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, begun in the 3rd century BC. The Septuagint transliterates the Hebrew name for Midian as either Midian or Medium. The Septuagint states that Jethro was a priest of Midian, who went out and then went into the desert to meet Moses. The location of ancient Midian can be determined from a map produced by Ptolemy, a 2nd century AD geographer in Alexandria.
And the Septuagint is not alone in placing the mountain near a city in modern-day Saudi Arabia. Demetrius the chronographer in the 3rd century BC claims that after Moses married Zipporah, they made their home in the city of Madian. And Philo, a Jewish philosopher, describes Zipporah as an Arab who lived in Arabia. He describes the Israelites wandering eastward all the way across the Sinai Peninsula to the southern edge of Palestine just before the revelation at Sinai. Philo thus places Mount Sinai somewhere in northwestern Arabia. Philo adds one more small detail to the investigation of Mount Sinai. He says that Moses went up the highest and most sacred of the mountains in its region. But it is the Apostle Paul who provides the finishing touch. In Galatians 4:25, he says, "Now Hagar stands for Mount Sinai in Arabia." Where does that leave Jebel Musa, or the present Mount Sinai? Since 1956, archaeological teams have searched for evidence that Moses and the Israelites once camped here for nearly a year after their flight from Egypt.
When the Sinai Peninsula was under Israeli control, they discovered nothing. Out of over 8,000 inscriptions from the southern half of the Sinai Peninsula, only a handful are Hebrew Aramaic. The tradition of identifying one of the mountains in the Sinai Peninsula as the Mountain of Moses was a scholar's invention, without any Jewish precedents whatsoever. No Jews were ever interested in the Sinai Peninsula, with any respect anyway to Moses.
Traditions, particularly religious traditions, die hard. The Mount Sinai, located near the monastery of St. Catherine, is now anchored in 1,600 years of tradition, and those who are devoted to this site show little interest in looking elsewhere. Is there some scientific evidence that proves Jebel el-Lawz in northwestern Saudi Arabia is, in fact, the true Mount Sinai? What is there besides just the location to suggest this mountain was once the place where God communicated directly with Moses? Has anyone actually been there to see and catalog the evidence? And what does the Saudi government think of all this newfound attention? Aaron's heart was troubled, but the plotters leaped with delight when Aaron put the idol upon the altar of stone. Their blasphemy was complete. God already knew of their idolatry and was set on destroying the Israelites when Moses interceded and with the 10 Commandments hastened down the mountain to confront the Israelites.
Come, faithful Joshua.
The first 4 commandments were concerned with devotion to God. The 5th commandment demanded respect for one's parents and set the standards for human relations in civil law. Murder, adultery, and theft were outlawed by the next 3 commandments, indicating the sacredness of life, marriage, and property. Israelites were not to offer false evidence in courts, and by this commandment the sacredness of justice was set forth. The final commandment demanded that one's heart and mind not covet a neighbor's possessions.
When Moses reached the base of the mount, he was filled with sudden horror.
Oh, Israel! What have you done? Turned your backs on Almighty God. Even as Jehovah our Lord has made you his chosen people, you would go whoring after false gods. Must you make an abomination in your own house? Oh, Israel, you are not worthy to receive the law of God. Smite the idolaters! All ye who would follow the word of the living God, rise up now! Purge them from our midst! Strike now for the Lord our God!
Even as the faithful under Joshua slew the idolaters, Moses destroyed the golden calf. But even while the terrible fires of vengeance burned through the camp, forgiveness and reconciliation were already beginning. According to the Bible, Moses chiseled out a second set of stone tablets and again went to the top of Mount Sinai.
The Bible is very clear.
God originally wrote the Ten Commandments on stone tablets of his own making and gave them to Moses. After Moses smashed the original tablets when he saw the Israelites worshiping the golden calf, Moses cut another set of tablets, and God wrote on those too. There's really no significant evidence in the Bible of a third set of stone tablets. Any reference to a third set comes from a misinterpretation of one passage where the Bible is really telling about the second set of tablets.
Most of the places mentioned in Exodus are unknown. Scholars and investigators are still searching for the point at which the children of Israel might have crossed the Red Sea. No one knows where they might have first set foot in Sinai, and the location of the mystical Mount Sinai itself is the subject of relentless argument. Lately, however, modern technology has begun to have an impact on the discussion. Infrared satellite photography, for example, is helping to provide a clearer picture of the actual location of this fabled mountain.
With satellite infrared photography, there have been major archaeological discoveries found throughout the world. There's a trail that comes down the west branch of the Red Sea. The left-hand branch of it comes down to the tip of the Sinai Peninsula, stops there. It appears to come out the other side and then wanders north to the highest mountain in the area, Jabal al-Lawz. And we did find what I think is important archaeological evidence that something took place at Jabal al-Lawz.
Larry Williams, who might best be described as an adventurer, as opposed to, say, an archaeologist or scientist, enlisted the services of Robert Cornuke, a former policeman with a reputation for bravery, and the two men literally sneaked into Saudi Arabia and made their way to the mountain called Jebel el-Lawz on modern maps, but which 4 years earlier had been described as the real Mount Sinai by amateur archaeologist Ron Wyatt.
In 1988, we retraced the Exodus route from the tip of the Sinai Peninsula into Saudi Arabia, using the Bible and satellite imagery to find the actual route. Inland, 33 kilometers, we found the bitter springs of Mara mentioned in Exodus 15. This dirt sample from the springs has been chemically analyzed and was found to contain excessive iron and dissolved salts, making it very bitter. Continuing along the route, we came to the clear water springs mentioned in Exodus 15:27. Here, caves were being excavated by Saudi archaeologists. They said they had found the writings in these caves indicating that Moses had come through this area. The tomb of Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, and Zipporah, the wife of Moses, were found in these caves.
And we did find what I think is important archaeological evidence that something took place at Jabal al-Lawz. We found at the base of this mountain 12 pillars, 18.5 feet in diameter. Why not 7? Why not 11? Why 12? With the 12 tribes of Moses fitting so perfectly into that scenario. Additionally, on the flat in front of this mountain, we found a large pile of rocks about 24 feet tall. There's a petroglyph of an Egyptian, not an Arabic drawing, but an Egyptian drawing of the golden calf. And additionally, at the base of the mountain, we found kind of a wing-shaped formation, foundation pointing towards the mountain, and there we found marble, round marble stones. This is some of the stone of it. This rock is not indigenous to that area of Saudi Arabia, let alone to Saudi Arabia.
An encampment area large enough for an estimated 1 to 2 million people is a major factor in determining the location of the real Mount Sinai, and a source of water for a group that large would be essential for an extended stay of even a month, let alone a year. But the Bible provides other clues as well. How does Jebel el-Lawz measure up in some of these more obscure requirements?
We found the top of the mountain to be black, as if the rocks had been burnt, possibly confirming biblical scripture that the Lord descended upon it in fire and smoke.
Archaeologists have identified another small footnote to the Mount Sinai argument having to do with the tablets of the law, or the Ten Commandments.
Unlike other law codes, such as the Code of Hammurabi, which was written on an 8-foot stela and stood out in the open air, the Ten Commandment tablets were portable and designed to be kept as a sacred treasure. Although ancient Egyptian and Babylonian stelas, tablets, and wall reliefs were usually done in limestone, basalt rock, or diorite, there is strong evidence that the Ten Commandment tablets were done in granite or marble. rock types that are found at the Jebel al-Lawz Mount Sinai site in Saudi Arabia.
Shortly after Cornuke and Williams visited the site, the Saudi government closed down the Jebel al-Lawz site to any foreign archaeological study. They also erected a chain-link fence and placed a military guard around the mountain to prevent even clandestine exploration of the site.
The Saudi government is in a very difficult political position. Because the Saudis had no sense of nationalism when the country was unified in the 1920s, the House of Saud used the theology of the Wahhabi sect of Islam to create national unity. Saudi Arabia is still run largely by a coalition between the royal family and the religious establishment. That religious establishment is very resistant to exploring anything archaeologically before Islam, a period they see as characterized by moral chaos. The other problem the House of Saud faces is external. If it allows archaeological excavations of ancient Israelite sites in Saudi Arabia, the House of Saud opens itself up to the anger of the Arab world.
The evidence for the real Mount Sinai being in Saudi Arabia appears to be overwhelming, but the ancient animosities are still preventing scientists and scholars from uncovering factual evidence that could settle the argument once and for all. And today's modern warriors are adding to the difficulty.
According to Howard Blum, in his book, The Gold of Exodus, any verification of Jebel al-Lawz is going to be very complicated. The mountain is now part of a $5.6 billion Saudi military installation called Operation Peace Shield. It was built with the approval of the U.S. Congress using U.S. contractors and Air Force personnel. Operation Peace Shield was originally designed as a radar installation in order to protect the kingdom against intruders. However, according to Blum, it has since been armed with missiles capable of hitting targets within Israel and Iraq. It is ironic that what some investigators believe to be the true Mount Sinai, the place where the law was given for the preservation of Israel, could potentially be used for the destruction of Israel.
Does this mean, then, that we may never really know whether or not this is the Mount Sinai on which Moses received the Ten Commandments? Or is there some hope for future exploration?
We need permission for a competent, trained archaeologist to go in and excavate and record the material carefully and submit it for review by other scholars, because there are too many gaps in our knowledge.
Whether or not this is proven to be the mountain where Moses stood in awe before the burning bush, there appears to be considerable evidence that Mount Sinai is located somewhere in northwestern Saudi Arabia. And if the Exodus account is true, that mountain will be blackened by heavenly fire. There will be evidence of a large and sometimes boisterous encampment, and perhaps even, as some have suggested, some remnant of the gold and jewels and other personal possessions the fleeing slaves were permitted to take with them. Proof positive of the exact location of Mount Sinai, it seems, is literally hidden behind armed guards of the Saudi government. But the earliest, post-biblical Jewish sources from Palestine, the mid-2nd century book of Jubilees, fragments of which were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, gives a long and idealized description of world geography that suggests the author believed Mount Sinai to be in the Arabian Peninsula. But the clearest description of early Jewish literature of the location of Mount Sinai comes from the 1st century historian Josephus. He wrote that Mount Sinai is the highest of mountains in the region of the city of Madian. Towering 8,000 feet above the desert floor, Jebel al-Lawz certainly fits that description. But the sad fact is, in spite of all the evidence that has been accumulated, we really don't know, and indeed can't know for certain until competent archaeological excavations are once again permitted on the mountain itself. But the presence of a large Arab military installation on the mountain brings up an interesting question. If Jebel al-Lawz was proven to be the true Mount Sinai, and the Saudi military was using that strategic position to direct missiles into Israel, would the Israeli government destroy the Mountain of Moses? Something to think about.